Hey there, Coastal Bend, Josh Maxwell, and I'm joined here with Votebeat reporter Natalia Contreras. To get right into it, I wanted to talk with you about SB16. It just made its way through the Senate, and it's awaiting House approval. And I know you've been reporting on this extensively, and so to kind of just really get into it, what is SB16 and how can it impact voters here?
Yeah, SB16, like you just said, was just approved by the Senate. The 20 Senate Republicans co-authored this bill along with its main author, Senator Brian Hughes. He's from Republican from Central Texas. In this bill, basically what it would do, it would require all voters to provide proof of citizenship, or I should say all Texans to provide proof of citizenship to register to vote in the state. And yeah, like you said, it just got the full approval of the Senate. It's now waiting approval in the House. Its companion bill is likely going to make it to committee in the House Elections Committee. In the next few weeks, it's probably going to move pretty soon. And so, yeah, we're looking into what those implications are going to be for all Texans, not just folks here in South Texas.
And so give me a step-by-step of your reporting process, kind of just following this bill. What have you uncovered about it?
So, leading up to the 2024 election, as you know, very contentious election, Governor Greg Abbott actually put out a press release in October of last year saying that, here are all the millions of people that we've removed from the voter rolls that weren't supposed to be on the voter rolls anymore because, they moved, they died. But also, he said that the state had removed several thousand non-citizens from the voter rolls. Votebeat, along with the Texas Tribune and ProPublica, we did an investigation into those numbers. And we actually found that the number the governor released of the amount of non-citizens that had been on the voter rolls was actually inflated. He said there were several thousand non-citizens on the voter rolls, but what we found is that number was less than 600 non-citizens that had been on the voter rolls, and they had been removed. These folks hadn't voted, or some of those folks that he actually mentioned in that high number were actually U.S. citizens that just didn't respond to a notice asking to provide proof of citizenship. So voter rolls are managed, the voter rolls of the state are managed at the local level. And so every U.S. citizen gets a summons, to go and be part of a jury, right? And they send you a questionnaire. And in that questionnaire, you say, hey, I'm a U.S. citizen, or no, I can't participate in this because I'm not a U.S. citizen. If anyone marks no, or maybe they just didn't respond, then the county sends them a notice saying, hey, we need to check that you are in fact a citizen because you either check no or you didn't respond to this question. So those people were included in that number that the governor released, but that doesn't mean that they were non-citizens. It just means that maybe they didn't respond to a letter, or maybe they checked off a box on accident. So we found that it's very dangerous, and it actually diminishes trust in elections when a public official or a leader of a state like Governor Greg Abbott puts out this type of information about who's on the voter rolls, without full context. And so following that, even though we found that those numbers were inflated, Governor Abbott wasn't the only Republican that kept making these claims, right? We saw that all through 2024, that non-citizens were going to be voting en masse and, the Democrats were going to win. That did not happen. Nonetheless, the governor, Representative Chip Roy, U.S. Congress, were making those claims. We have seen a bill, an act right now in U.S. Congress that's similar to what we're seeing here in Texas, requiring proof of citizenship. It's just that non-citizen voting very rarely happens, and when it does happen, it has serious consequences for those folks. It also, when it has happened, it doesn't It doesn't change the outcome of an election. It's just very, very, very few times that has happened. And like I said, it has serious consequences. But here we are in the beginning of the legislative session. SB16 is a priority. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick made it a priority this year. And so as we saw, it passed the Senate. And so we are expecting it to move in the House as well.
And so really walk me through the cost. As I was reading your report, you talked about this is going to be a very expensive endeavor if it does get signed into law. And so what could some of those expenditures look like coming down from the Secretary of State's office?
So the bill would be costly at the state level. However, it could have more costly implications for individual counties across the state because we are adding now more paperwork that local officials are going to have to handle. Already, our voter registration system is a paper-based system. You have to fill out a paper application when you want to register to vote. The counties already have a process, that they use to check and verify that you are who you say you are, and to verify that you are eligible to vote in Texas. There's going to be additional steps to that. Counties may need more people. If counties are trying to check everybody's citizenship, you may have a line at the voter registrar's office. Here in Nueces County, the folks who handle that are in the tax assessor's office. If you've ever gotten your sticker at the Nueces County courthouse, you've gone to the tax assessor's office. Right next door to that is the voter registration office. It's not as big. There's not that many windows. There's not that many workers. It could create a backlog for local officials here. So it's still unclear what the costs are going to be at the local level, but at the state level, it's already looking like we're going to be spending $2 million on implementing this. The Secretary of State's office has said that they need additional staffers, additional resources, and so yeah, it's gonna cost taxpayers some money.
And so when you get into those documents, I remember one of the documents I would show proof of when I would go to register to vote was my driver's license. So what documents would people need to produce? And more importantly, how much time would they have to produce those documents?
So what Senator Brian Hughes was saying actually just a couple of days ago when he was debating this bill on the Senate floor was that the majority of Texans have a driver's license or a state ID. And so we in Texas began requiring proof of citizenship, either a birth certificate, a naturalization document, or a U.S. passport in the mid-2000s, like around 2008 or so. You needed that to get a driver's license. And so Senator Hughes said that he's not worried that this is going to have any implications on people or that people are going to have a difficulty because most Texans already have a driver's license or a state ID, which means proof of citizenship or proof of legal presence in the country. They've already verified that. The problem there is that if you register to vote prior to 2008 and you actually don't have a driver's license or a state ID, which in this case could include not only elderly folks, people with disabilities, but also college students that are coming and going to school here in Texas from out of state, who are residents of the state and could vote if they change their address and they register. It could have implications. How are they going to obtain? How is the state also going to verify that they are citizens if they register prior to that date that I just mentioned? Because the Texas Department of Public Safety only in 2008 and forward started requiring these documents. Alongside that, prior to 2002, folks didn't need to provide that information either. And there's a lot of people that have been voters in the state of Texas for decades. And so they may have to figure out a way to provide those documents. And it would be your birth certificate, a U.S. passport, a naturalization certificate, any type of certificate that proves that, if you were born overseas, that, you're also a U.S. citizen. But those could be really hard documents to obtain. A lot of people don't have a U.S. passport. If you are new to Texas and you are, eligible to vote, but you need to get your birth certificate from a different state, a lot of people also weren't born in hospitals. And like I said, talking about elderly folks and people with disabilities who may not as easily be able to acquire those documents could be tough. I'll give you an example on the investigation that we did last year with ProPublica and the Texas Tribune. There was a woman that had been kicked off the voter rolls because they told her that she needed to provide proof of citizenship, even though she was a U.S. citizen and had voted in the past. And so she actually was born in Louisiana, and she went to great extent to get that birth certificate FedExed to her on time to be put back on the voter rolls and vote in the the November 2024 election. It was costly. She spent a ton of money to try to get that document and to try to prove that she was a U.S. citizen. She was removed, it was an error that she was removed from the rolls. She shouldn't have been removed from the rolls, but she tried to obtain that proof, right? And it can be costly. Not everybody's gonna have the time and the resources or just the ability to do that.
And so when you look into kind of just the expenditures with money and the efforts, do you think that this will create kind of another stigma when it comes to voting? I remember being in school, whenever people would come in and tell us, like, guys, it's time to register to vote, I'm like, you know what, I got finals to worry about. Could this kind of add another layer to make it more, if not difficult, more uninteresting for some people to even put in the effort to vote?
Well, yes, but also I think one thing that we haven't, talked about is that if this bill passes and you register to vote, like with the example that you gave, at a college event, are you going to have your birth certificate with you on hand? Are you going to have, you're not going to have that proof. So college students who register to vote at one of those events that you just mentioned are not going to have proof of citizenship handy. What this bill also does is that if you don't provide that proof within a certain amount of time, you're placed on the separate list, federal only. So you would only be allowed to vote on federal only races. And so what this bill also does is that federal only races, you would think, okay, I can vote for the president, I can vote for US Congress and US Senate. But what the Texas bill does is that it actually only allows you to vote for those congressional races. It doesn't allow you to vote for the president. So if you did register to vote at an event like this that I just mentioned, you didn't provide proof of citizenship either at that time or in person with the county, you'll be placed on that list. You go to vote for city council, you go to vote for a county commissioner or for another local race that you're interested in, you're not going to be able to because you didn't provide that proof of citizenship. So it is, like you mentioned, going to further disencourage voters, but it's also going to disenfranchise you from being able to participate in local elections.
And so when you really get into that, kind of just for people who maybe have never voted, like maybe college students, people who are just of age, and who maybe have never done the voting process, kind of just how can that have a first impression on them when they're even kind of just getting their information ready? Kind of, I know we had talked about kind of creating a backlog on more of the worker sense, but for these people, it's their first time voting. Kind of how can that impact them?
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to vote here in Texas. The voter registration process is already a lot, even without the requirement of proof of citizenship. The fact that you have to fill out a paper form, or you could register at DPS when you're getting your driver's license, but you have to make an appointment and go there in person. You could renew that license right online after a while, but you still have to go in person. So it is a lot of work already to register to vote in Texas as it is. It's a paper form. The fact that we still lack online voter registration in the state We are one of only 8 states in the country that still doesn't have online voter registration. Even though other Republican states have it, conservative states have had online voter registration for a long time. Yeah, it is going to further discourage people. Just like you said earlier, we have a lot of things going on. I mean, we have families, we have jobs, we have school. Often voters fill out a voter registration form and they think they're done. But what if they made an error? What if they made a typo or, transcribed their social security number on it? They can make mistakes. And because we don't have online voter registration, also at the county, they can also make mistakes. And when they're inputting, manually inputting that information into the system, they can make mistakes. All of this, it's just, the system that we have in Texas currently, it's not error proof. I mean, errors happen. The system could improve, but right now it seems like our legislators are just putting up more requirements and more obstacles for people to, to make it easier for people to register to vote.
And so when it comes to kind of just figuring out, you had just talked about those obstacles. When this bill makes it to the House, kind of take me a little bit through your reporting process of kind of just who you've spoken with, maybe families or just people who have told you like, hey, like, I'm elderly, I don't even know where these documents are anymore, like how is this going to impact me? Kind of just who have you spoken with about this?
So in our previous reporting, we've reported also on whenever the legislature in 2021 changed the rules to vote by mail. They added, and there's an additional number that voters had to provide on there. They also had to apply every year to vote by mail. It just became very confusing. Election officials that we've talked to right now are concerned that this, as this bill moves, this is going to create the same level of confusion for voters. If this bill passes, it would go into effect this September, this fall. We already have a primary March of 2026. Election officials have told me there's just not going to be enough time for people to become familiar with this. And so that could be a huge hurdle that election officials in the state is going to have to get over. Another part of this too is that the state spends very little money on voter education. So these are things that voters are sometimes trying to figure out as they're trying to vote. They just realize the rules changed again. And so we're seeing every legislative year there's more added requirements, there's more penalties that get added, and voters are not familiar with those until they get to the voting booth and something happens and they're not able to vote. And so right now what I'm doing is I am talking to election officials, I'm talking to voting rights advocates about what they could see as a problem in the future with this bill. And I'm also watching to see whether there's any changes to this in the House of Representatives in the state. And so there is a chance right now that, this bill passes, but maybe, I'm wondering, right, is this maybe also what moves Texas to get online voter registration? This bill, Senate Bill 16, is modeled after a law that's been in effect for years already in Arizona. Arizona was the first state to implement online voter registration, and so this law also in Arizona has created obstacles for college students, for people who live in native land, from a lot of people that come from marginalized communities, and so we expect something similar to happen here. But like I said, the state of Arizona has had online voter registration for some time. So would lawmakers consider this process, would lawmakers consider building into this bill an easier process to handle all of the additional paperwork? It's what I'm trying to also start to ask, and that's another step of the reporting that I'm looking at. How is Texas, how are local officials actually going to do this? What is it going to cost? What is it going to take for everybody, including the voters.
When it comes to who this all impacts, and I know we've talked about it a lot during this interview, but bottom line, who are the most vulnerable to this bill if it gets signed into law?
So that is something that I'm still trying to figure it out. I think it's too early right now to tell because, like I said, the law can be reshaped as it moves through the legislative process. However, like I was mentioning earlier, Senator Brian Hughes, who's the main author of this bill, has said he doesn't expect this to impact a lot of people because a lot of people in Texas already have a Texas driver's license, and you've already provided that. So when you look at those numbers, we have more than 18 million registered voters in Texas. How many of those already have a driver's license or a state ID? How many of those don't? What we found in our reporting in Arizona and how this law has impacted voters in Arizona, like I mentioned, over there it has impacted college students who don't have those documents, when they're registering to vote, and it has impacted people from historically marginalized communities, like people who live on native land. Here, it's still unclear who that could be. Texas is huge. People are moving to Texas all the time. Most communities in Texas are rural communities. It's a huge state, like I just said. And so I think we're still trying to figure out who exactly could be impacted. But the bottom line is that this bill requires proof of citizenship from everybody. So whether you're already registered or not, the state is going to check whether you've already provided that. And this process, it's still unclear how it's going to work. There could be, mistakes along the way. A few years ago, the governor and the Secretary of State's office announced that there were all of these non-citizens on the voter rolls. That was inaccurate information, inaccurate data that was released. These data sets that we have at the state level don't communicate with each other. This is going to be something new for the state. So yeah, I think we're still trying to figure out who exactly is going to be most impacted. But like I said, as of right now, the state is going to check that everybody that's registered to vote has provided that proof of citizenship. And if you haven't, you're going to have to, or you're not going to be able to vote in your local elections.
And as you just mentioned, it's going to affect, or it could affect, a lot of people in rural communities. And I know here in the Coastal Bend, San Pat, Refugio, and even parts of Nueces County, very rural. And so what are some things that people in rural counties go through that maybe people in more urban parts of the city don't go through?
So I think one thing that's important to remember is that in those communities rely a lot on those events that you just mentioned. Maybe at a community event, at a town hall, the League of Women Voters or some other group is there with a table, trying to get people registered to vote because they don't have access to the county building or to their voter registrar. And so those folks are going to register to vote, but they're not going to have their documents there. I think of people also who live in areas where they don't have access to transportation, or in the colonias here around, South Texas as well. I have been thinking about those communities that are not, as close to their county buildings. And even if they do, have the time or maybe the transportation or maybe the money, they would still have to come to the county, try to get a certified copy of their birth certificate, or, something that they could use that here in Corpus Christi we have access to because we could just go downtown and, stand in line and all of that. But it's going to be an added burden for voters in those outside areas.
My final question, as this bill makes its way to the House, where is your reporting taking you based on what you've already found out?
Yeah, so right now, like I was saying, I think the big question is who's going to be mostly impacted by this? Is the state, by adding this requirement, going to try to bring Texas to the 21st century and add online voter registration in any way? That's another question that I also have. The state is spending millions on, this added step and this additional paperwork that people are going to have to handle. Another thing that I'm, questioning and looking into is, security. These are really important documents that now local officials are going to have access to. Is this going to put voters more at risk of, I don't know, fraud or anything like that, right? Because any type of system, even our banks, anytime that you're putting important information, sensitive information inside a system, I mean, there could be a problem there. So is there an issue with security there? I'm going to be asking about that. And I also want to see what state officials have to say and how they react to some of these questions that we're answering, whether they're going to, try to, address any of those concerns. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. We just have to see as the legislative process gets underway.
All right, and thank you so much for joining us here, Natalia. I really appreciate it, and thank all of you at home for joining us. And of course, you can catch this full interview here on 3 News Plus.